partnerships, value-added resellers, indirect sales. All of these things mean the same thing, or at least they did to me before this podcast. They meant that an organization had a route to market to sell its services where it didn't have the capital or ability to establish an entity in that market. I got Mark Rawlings Smith and Steve Mozley together, who are two thought leaders in this space. And in Steve's instance, Steve is the Chief Marketing Officer for LiveView, and LiveView have already got an extremely active, successful global network of partners and are seeking to expand that. Mark is an individual who has had a career that's dominated by gathering and gaining experience through being accountable for partner networks for some huge organizations. What fascinated me in speaking to these two in this special episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast was just how much emphasis both of them put on the vital lifeblood of successful partner relations when it comes down to relationships. Relationships is a topic that you'll hear them come back to and back to and back to. And no matter how much I try to explore what the identification process should be of what a potentially good partner looks like, or how to structure contracts with a partner, or whether partners want exclusivity when it comes to the products, either for their domain or their geographic footprint, these guys keep coming back to the absolutely vital essence of fostering and maintaining good relationships if you want a successful partner ecosystem. I hope you enjoy this episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast as much as I loved filming it with both Mark and Steve.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. As most of you will know, I'm lucky enough on a daily basis to get to speak to some of the business leaders and thought leaders from around the world of broadcasting, OTT, and increasingly look into the granular levels of their business that determine the success and traction that they get in each region. What I've noticed over the course of the last few months and maybe even 18 months is that there is a more distinct move towards partnerships, partner ecosystems, and facilitating geographic presence and maybe even domain expertise when it comes to certain sectors through the utilization of partners, value-added resellers, channel, indirect, whatever badge you might want to put on it. There was a post recently from Steve Mozley, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at LiveView, that caught my attention because he spoke about the process that they're going through at the moment to try and mobilize and pop up a really effective partner network. So I thought it would be good to get Steve, who is one of the senior leadership team at LiveView and somebody that I've worked with quite a lot over the last few years, who is an absolute domain expert when it comes to partner ecosystems from an academic perspective, as well as his firsthand experience, onto this recording together so that we could talk about partner ecosystems. Mark Rawlings Smith, who is the Strategic Alliance Director at Wowzer as of today. Congratulations, Mark, on the new appointment. And Steve Mozley, the Chief Marketing Officer at LiveView. Welcome to the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here, guys.
It's great to be here.
I'm looking forward to talking about the range of things that are happening within the market at the moment, within your businesses at the moment, and then kind of playing those out from a macro perspective on what the motivations of businesses are to explore and extract the value from partner networks. I feel as though I've got a certain affiliation to this because I spent a chapter of my career as a head of indirect sales for an organization. So I've got some familiarity with the complexion of what we might discuss, but you guys are definitely the domain experts when it comes to this. So I'd like to start off with a simple question. And I think this is relevant to set the stage because there may well be some business owners, departmental owners, or even sales leaders that have heard about this term indirect sales or channel sales and realize what the bottom line benefits might be, but don't quite understand what the pure definition of it is. I'd quite like to get an appreciation of how each one of you would articulate what is indirect sales or partner sales, and what do you think is the best term to describe what we're talking about? Mark, do you want to kick us off?
I thought we'd start with the simple questions, Chris. So let's have a go. So I think there's definitely different categories here. Indirect sales is quite clearly where another party's taking a commercial contract, I would say. So typically your resellers in that capacity. There's then a whole other world of partnerships that we can discuss around ecosystem partnerships, obviously cloud partnerships, where I'm focused mostly today, and potentially others as well in the US. A lot of distributors, but primarily I'd say indirect sales is resellers, and then a more broader partnership category to capture all the other things that are going on in the world today to deal with the complexity in our world.
Okay. There's a point in that, Mark, that I want to come back to that I hadn't talked about in the introduction, which is not just about the routes to market to sell. The full partner ecosystem is obviously about the providers into whatever your solution is as well. So thanks for picking me up on that indirectly, Mark. Steve, what about you? How would you crystallize what this is all about? And it's not your own sales team selling stuff.
Absolutely. So I always talk about 3 audience groups when you're thinking about taking a brand to market. You have your internal audience group, stakeholders, all the way from shareholders down to the folk on the ground. You have your partners, and then you have your customers. And for me, it's kind of like the triangle that you need to create fire. You need those 3 things working in concert in order for you to move forward. So the customers have got to understand and want and demand your product. Your internal teams need to be able to supply that product, and the indirect or partner channel is there to help you amplify and catalyze the whole of the propositional exploitation.
Okay. That allows me, Steve, to kind of contextualize this with speaking directly about the scenario that you've got at LiveView. And, you know, I don't know how much you can actually talk about the strategic motivations to do this, but what's the moment that you're in at LiveView that has made you accountable at the top table for putting something together that's effective in those ways for your organization?
So the first thing to say is it's a shared enterprise. So marketing are at the table, customer success are at the table, and of course our sales colleagues are at the table. And I'm sure we'll probably touch on this kind of mythical beast called channel conflict, but we can maybe slay that one later on. But so the 3 stakeholders internally are effectively still trying to do the same thing. We're trying to expand our presence and our impact in the world because we have a mission that we're looking to deliver, and we want to find ways of scaling that in sensible approaches. So it's about people, it's about process, and it's about product. LiveView now, we're an 18-year-old startup, we like to think of ourselves, right? And we disrupted the market that we operate in by inventing something called IP video over bonded connections, right? But effectively what that enables people to do is to save a lot of time and effort when they're producing live video. And so traditionally, if you wanted to produce a news program or a sports program, you would roll a satellite truck with lots of people to the event, and you'd spend lots of time configuring, and then hopefully you'd go live. Or you'd dig up the roads and lay some fiber cabling and then connect it and backhaul the content that way. Lots of planning, lots of time, very difficult to react in the moment. Now, the challenge with live is it's live. There are no second chances. So the products that our customers use must be reliable, they must be resilient, and they have to deliver the quality. But more importantly, they need to be underpinned or underwritten by rock steady support. Now, we operate in 150 countries. But as I say, we're an 18-year-old startup. We operate in a very lean and efficient manner. So it's not possible for us to be everywhere our customers are all the time, every time they want to go live. So for us, a partner network becomes not only a sales delivery driver, but also a support delivery driver. And those 2 things have to be delivered together to help us scale.
Okay. So I get that ecosystem, but something else that's happening that I would like your take on, Steve, is this shift increasingly to virtualized environments and software. You know, the kind of OB van situation that you'd mentioned before might be a harder thing to sell through a sales channel. What's the live view posture on whether or not it's actually the increasing amount of software involved with the type of solutions that you guys create when you're operating across the geographic footprint that you just mentioned, and maybe how easy it is to actually utilize a partner network to sell a more software module type proposition?
So I guess traditionally, yes, partners, resellers, value-added resellers, whatever we want to call them. I personally, I think resellers undersells the thing that our partners can do. Traditionally, though, they've been characterized as box shifters, and possibly there's still a number of smaller partners that are thinking about, I'm going to sell this thing to this customer. The brand's task is to step beyond that, and is to stimulate a customer rocking up to a partner and making a request for a product because it's the right product for the job. So back in the gaming industry, we used to call it pester power. We used to try and get the end consumer to say to the decision maker, we need to buy this thing. Right? So my task as a marketeer is to go over the heads of my partners to stimulate the demand and drive them into a partner showroom to procure the product. Why are they going to a partner? Because the partner brings trust. That local purchaser, the customer, knows a partner, but they maybe speak the language, they maybe understand the solution set that customer already has. So they're adding a sense of value. The challenge that I think Mark and we were talking about last time was about, now we sell hardware, yes, but we also sell software, and we sell software in a recurring manner because many of our end users want to avoid the capex hurdle of having to find lots of cash in order to invest in a production solution with the promise of making money later. So they want to pay as they go. So software is a great vehicle for us to be able to deliver that. The challenge comes, how do you then keep the partner interested in selling this virtualized concept? Maybe the hardware is a platform that gets the sell through the door, but then the conversation becomes about how can we as the brand and you as the partner satisfy, and here's the real trick, continue to satisfy the customer's needs as we go forward. If we can do that, then we can both be rewarded. The customer gets an awesome service, the partner can participate in the recurring revenue, and of course, we've retained and grown a customer and a partner. So I think it's massively symbiotic, and I don't see a conflict between selling software and hardware through the partner channel. I think they can work really well together.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in your case, where the symbiosis, as you just said, between hardware and software is, predicates the success of the operation. Mark, let's bring you in a little bit. Talk a bit about the experience that you've had when it comes to partner ecosystems, because you're definitely somebody that's earned my trust and respect when it comes to how you articulate your perspective and your experience of these things. But give anybody who's listening or potentially watching this on LinkedIn Live a view of what the kind of things that you've done in your career to give you that posture when it comes to this topic.
So I think, just listening to Steve there cover some really, let's call them critical points in terms of partnerships. What I've done over the years is done my best to really simplify the whole game of partnerships. There's so much complexity in the world. I mentioned it earlier, and sometimes you just need to drill down to the basics. And just reflecting back on what Steve was saying, there's really three things that I come back to frequently across different types of partnerships. Number one, Steve was talking about sort of shared enterprise and how in marketing and sales and customer success and others at the table. It's partnerships have to be part of a company's market strategy. So often you see a sales organization, a product sales organization that thinks, okay, we can grow revenue. Let's bolt on this partnership function, and it's like a bolt on your mobile phone contract. It's like an extra, and it's never really embedded into the whole organization. And Steve, I absolutely 100% agree. It's not just about sales; it's about the whole life cycle. So it needs to be tied into the market strategy. So by that I mean, how are you going to go to market? Not a product go to market plan, an actual market strategy for the organization. How are you going to address the different parts of the market you're going after in order to hit your corporate goals? And how do partnerships fit into that? and how does that bed into the whole organization? So, number one is really pushing that with leadership teams. The second is what I call the value chain, although embarrassingly I learned it was called something else the other day, and now I've forgotten again what it was, but there is some economic theory from the 70s that articulates it, and I'll have to go back and look it up again. But it's really, if you look at I'm a real advocate for positioning customer experience and job to be done theory. And people talk about job to be done, but actually it's, if you look at Uber as an example outside of our industry, the job to be done is to get someone from A to B. It's not to provide them with a taxi service. And whilst that may sound like being really pernickety, actually there's a fundamental difference when it comes to design. So, in LiveView's instance, for example, and Steve, call me out if I get this wrong, but the job to be done is to offer a certain experience around a live event. Whether that's having the thing broadcast on air, no interruptions, something simple, whatever your definition of LiveView's brand. And then you think, well, hang on a minute, LiveView is a product organization. They make ABC products. That's what LiveView focuses on, or any other product company. How do you deliver the rest of that experience? How do you deliver the on-site presence? How do you deliver the trust? How do you make sure all the right people are involved locally? All those other bits that make up that total experience that as a product company, it's probably not in your interest to try and cover, because it's just going to finish you off as a business, frankly, trying to cover everything. How do you deliver those to give the right experience? And that's why I talk about the value chain. And there has to be value in that for the product company, for the partner, in this case, talking about resellers, and of course, added value for the customer. And I think that kind of mirrors what you were saying, Steve, around the three components: internal, partners, and customers. And then the third thing is trust. And trust is so important, especially in our industry, which is still relatively niche compared to many. The broadcast industry, so many people know each other, and so much is on the line, especially in live events. Having worked in that space back in the BT days, and that if something goes wrong, millions of people can suddenly be seeing a black screen. Right? You've got to know that everything is going to work. You've got to be able to trust each other, be able to trust the solutions. You've got to be able to trust your partners as well, and that just takes time. It's not something you can just sign a piece of paper. And somehow in law and signing a piece of paper, this just suddenly manifests out of nowhere. That takes time to build those relationships and that trust. So those are the areas that I've really honed in on over the years, and Steve has so clearly articulated in what he's described as well.
So let's pick up on one of those, because it's interesting to talk about. You mentioned the kind of subjective third dimension being trust. You touched on that as well, Steve. And you also mentioned there, Mark, service experience. I want to bring in a point around the life cycle associated to identifying, securing, inducting, training. And then, as you mentioned rightly, Steve, the biggest part of the life cycle with a partner is hopefully the part where you're successfully in flight and being successful. But what are the risks associated? At the juncture that you're at, Steve, where LiveView are about to start a fresh wave of partnerships, what are the things on your mind in terms of the risks and how you contain and mitigate the risks or issues associated to potentially getting partnerships wrong? That first stage is so important, isn't it? Because it is so resource intensive when you're finding partners and then bringing them on. What's your opinion on how to do that in the best way possible for all parties?
In a very considered manner, because from a brand looking to recruit a partner, and we've got a massively valued, stable base of partners. But just for the context, we're now bringing on board some partners who can help us explore some new geographies, but also some new market verticals, because they have deep expertise in these additional areas. So the first thing I think of is brand custodianship. We spent 18 years building a brand. We're intensely, jealously proud of the things that it stands for. So the first thing we need to understand is that whoever we're going to have representing us understands what it means to us. But then we need to understand what their brand means to them. And there has to be mutual respect for those two brands. Yes, you could run down well, let's just go straight to margins and can I afford to pay you enough to make it interesting for you to sell my product versus somebody else's product. And that's probably a great short-term way of approaching the business to scale it. But something that's more sustainable is really about what is the purpose. If we can find partners who have spent time nurturing a trusted advisor position in the markets they serve, then our data suggests that we'll have lower partner churn, higher AOV through the partner channel, and as a marketeer, they're more likely to give me the feedback that I crave. Hey, did that lead that I sent you, did it actually convert? What did you do to them? And where do we fit in that customer's workflow? So we get far more fidelity back in terms of communication. And then, of course, the underlying thing is I need to know that someone's going to be respectful of the messaging set that we deliver them. Because for their customers, they are LiveView. If we get it right, there's not really a distinction. Yes, they understand the partner, but they also understand that that partner is a trusted part of the LiveView family. And so we always start with the family. Are you going to be part of the family? And then do we have a set of measures that we can agree to that will tell us whether or not you're behaving in a familial type manner? And they can be things like training, commitment to demo equipment, actually turning up on time to meetings, all of these very small signals that suggest that somebody's invested in the pathway that we're looking to forge together.
Mark, what's your opinion on that component that Steve just mentioned around when you do get to a stage and you've incubated that relationship enough, there's enough reciprocation in the way that the brands are recognized, in the way it's all blossoming, but you get to discussing the contract. What's your experience of the best way to structure contracts with partners? And is it tiered pricing? Is it discount per deal? Obviously they want to drive a margin off the back of whatever solution they're formulating. What's your experience of that? And then I want to ask you both a question as well around the topic of exclusivity, because that usually is one that comes into this spectrum of dialogue. But what's your opinion on how to approach those contract conversations, Mark, for an organization that might be listening and thinking, we can do that, but how the hell do we get down to crossing the T's and dotting the I's? What happens then?
So number one with contracts, I'd say keep it simple. At risk of upsetting all the lawyers out there, hopefully it's a document you sign once and don't refer to. So don't kill yourself trying to sign a contract. Most resellers I've ever worked with are pretty flexible, and honestly, that's part of the reason why you're bringing them on board. So make sure it covers the basic, make sure it's fair, keep it simple. In terms of pricing, there are so many different pricing models out there. There's also laws and not legally qualified to advise on it, but the laws in different parts of the world about how much you can control the pricing to the end customer. So you've got to have some flexibility in there. But the truth of it is, and yes, you can prescribe a pricing approach in a contract. Yes, you can prescribe price lists. You can do it. There's lots of different ways you can do it. Ultimately, I think in our business, unless you're in a high volume, low value type arrangement, which I think is less common in our business, you're probably working side by side with the partners anyway on a deal. So you're probably working with them to structure that deal, and you're probably going to be negotiating stuff on a case by case, and without breaching any legislation through that process, through that normal sort of sales negotiation process, you will land at something that makes sense numerically for everyone involved, and ensures that you're in a competitive position with a deal, and there's something in it for everyone.
And what do you think, Mark, about that question of exclusivity? I imagine it's a fairly tough one in the broadcast arena, where people maybe need to put lots of solutions from different organizations into whatever's going on the ground as such. But what about the nature of the partnership? Do you think it works best with exclusive relationships where they just represent your organization, or do you think it doesn't matter?
So from experience, if you have good relationships, good partnerships, well-supported partnerships, partnerships that have understood boundaries in terms of, you know, whatever the constraint is. I mean, I guess territories normally in a reseller discussion, it doesn't necessarily come up that often. You don't necessarily need to address it. I've actually never dealt with anyone that's had an exclusivity contract, because if you manage the partner network in the right way and you set it up in the right way, and as Steve mentioned, you do it in a diligent way where you understand, okay, here's going back to the market strategy point. You know, here's our market strategy. We want to get into, you know, XYZ country or a new vertical, and you plan it out and you understand, okay, we're going to approach this like this, this like this, this like this type of partner. You shouldn't get that conflict anyway that demands the exclusivity. So I would encourage that. The diligent planning would mean that you wouldn't even be discussing that.
Steve, you're nodding. I assume that nod means that what Mark is sharing resonates with how you guys approach the market when it comes to your partner network.
Absolutely. I mean, if somebody brings the exclusivity conversation to the table, then my first response is, what is it that you're concerned about? What are you looking to paper over or to obfuscate from? Why do you think exclusivity is important? And if they say, well, you know, it's going to cut both ways and we'll just sell your stuff, and so, well, okay, that's probably not relevant, right? Because I'm fairly confident in my product and my services. You know, I've got the customer data and the independent data to tell me that reliability, value for money and quality, we're the market leader. So I'm kind of comfortable that my product is good. In fact, it's market leading for a reason. Tell me why then you should need exclusivity and I should need exclusivity, because hopefully I'm having a conversation with a partner because I believe they can add value. So if I take one of our small niche partners, Unlimited IRL, so they've worked with us, we've partnered with them to really bring our product down into the streamer or content creator world. So we have a sub-brand called Solo, and working with them, we've just we had the Streamer Awards 2024, and 19 of the finalists are Solo users. And in fact, the guy who won the Streamer of the Year award, Kai Sinat, is one of our customers. Right? We haven't ever talked to Unlimited IRL about exclusivity because they want to sell the best product they can to their market. We want them to sell the best products they can. We want them to have that trusted advisor position so that when they're talking to these content creators, they're not hindered by well, actually, you're only doing that because you're paid to do that. They're doing it because it's the right thing. And it becomes a much more collaborative way of doing business. And we find it accelerates the speed of business. And somebody said to me the other day, if you can operate at the speed of trust, you'll be untouchable. And that's roughly what we're trying to do. I think exclusivity can get in the way of that sometimes.
Steve, you always, whenever I speak to you, and I've known you for a few years, you always drop a sound bite that I want to scribble down and try and recycle somehow. And I think that operating at the speed of trust is the one for this conversation. So this part of our dialogue naturally leads me on to thinking about governance, you know, in-flight management, maintaining that spirit of trust, making sure that at the end of the day, the pipeline looks good and you're imparting the equity associated to your experience as the vendor into that relationship so that the partner on the ground gets the benefit of that. What is the best way to, I was going to use the word enforce. I'm not sure that sets the right tone, but to create a governance framework with partners. And especially, I suppose, when you get to a partner network that's got a certain critical mass globally, operating in multiple time zones, probably dozens, if not hundreds of partners. How do you do that? Is it a system thing? Is it a weekly meeting thing where you share your screens? What's your opinion on that one, Steve, with the partner network you've already got and the additions to that you hope to get?
I think it goes back to something Mark said earlier, which is keep it simple. So our partners range from sole traders who maybe do 3 or 4 deals a year, all the way up to distribution houses and resellers, VARs, who have turnovers which I would frankly die for, right? So we deal with them in different ways, but the principle's the same. Some of them will ask to use our PRM or our channel partner relationship management tool. Others, we know that they're reselling multiple customers or multiple suppliers' content. So we need to provide an API into our systems to make it super simple for them to work with us. So dialing down the complexity of working with us so that we can all focus in on how do we serve this customer's need in the best way is super important. Having that transparency then that comes from starting with a very customer-centric viewpoint. At the end of the day, if the customer doesn't buy and doesn't keep buying in a software-driven world, nobody's earning. So if you start there and then prove to yourselves, but again, it goes back to this concept of trust, prove to yourselves that if you do A and you do B, then C happens and you can repeat it, life becomes a lot easier. But of course, you need to have a very clear set of guidelines around brand, around behaviors, about lead reporting, about the way that MDF is spent, about training, about certification. All of those things need to be baked into the program with very clear cause and effect and behavioral responses. If this happens, we do that, and they become unequivocal, and everybody's very clear about that.
Mark, if there was one thing that it's important that the vendor does to contribute to the sentiment of the relationship where the partner remains enthusiastic, just off the top of your head, what do you think that one thing should be? Is it marketing, good pricing? What's the heartbeat of what the vendor should be doing for the partner?
Bring them in as part of the team. It's across the board. They're an extension of your sales arm. They're an extension of your marketing arm. They're an extension of your support arm. Treat them like that.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think? I mean, in my experience, I've always found that partners really appreciate getting the marketing input, because if they're a smaller entity, typically that might be a department that doesn't exist or that is a part-time occupation for someone within that business. Having access to the kind of team and intellectual capital that you can provide to them, I'd imagine, gives them a lot of wind in their sails locally if they're a smaller organization.
Absolutely. So I often think that my channel partner team are fractional CMOs. We lend them out to our partners that need them. Some don't need that, which is fantastic. But it goes back to being looking at them as part of the family. Now, of course, it's slightly different because oftentimes, in most familial relationships, you don't start with the end in mind. It just happens organically and you grow. But when you enter into a partnership, a commercial partnership, you absolutely need to start with where do we want this to go and what does success look like? Because not every partner is going to graduate through your promotional tiers and become a premium partner and earn all the margin, all that sort of stuff. And you simply wouldn't be able to manage them all if that were the case. It's about scaling. So starting with the end in mind, but as Mark has said, treating them, as we would say, like family is super important. So sharing with them, but being mindful that, of course, they are their own entity. So you always need to be mindful that they are slightly different to internal people. And that probably means that you need to take more care of them than your internal people, because, of course, you're seeing your internal people all the time. You're only seeing partners when you're having a partner relationship catch-up or you're talking to a customer together. So you need to be, I guess, mindful that they're the same, but also slightly different. Sounds a bit counterintuitive. Yep. Super important.
Mark, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think everyone, even at an individual human level, everyone's got their own things going on, and the same is true of partners as well. So yes, absolutely, treat them as part of the family, part of the team. Extend the capabilities and offerings in terms of training and support, and being there for sales meetings and all those things. But you've got because they are dealing with different situations, because they are in different places, because they are in different markets, and respect that knowledge, respect that experience, be open to it, learn from it, understand what they need above and beyond your sorry, Steve, one page of marketing brochure about how fantastic your product is. What else do they need beyond that to get in the door, to reinforce credibility, to help you achieve a win in that big account you've never been able to get into. Be open, listen, understand the cultural influences as well. So many retailers in countries where we're let's be honest, probably pretty ignorant of how things work, and the norm and the business norms for moving deals along. So embrace that difference, embrace the cultural differences, and embrace what you can learn, and add that into what you have to offer as well, I would say.
Great. Final question, guys, of the indirect sales and partners interrogation. If there was a piece of advice that you could offer to an organization that has never done anything from an indirect perspective, is the vendor, the sales, the whole ecosystem themselves at the moment, and they might be considering this or motivated to listening to this because they want some insight from guys like you that have been there, done it, and have got some battle scars, what anecdote would you offer them? What piece of advice would you offer them that would hopefully set them to sail in a safe journey towards their partner destination from the experience that you guys have had? Steve, what's yours first?
I would advise them not to approach building a channel partner relationship or program as though, if their primary motivation is to drive a lower cost per sale, we've got some customers that we don't want to deal with anymore, let's farm them out to a channel, then don't do it. Because that doesn't sound like a rich and rewarding experience. If you're looking to amplify your business by, as Mark has said, taking somebody else's expertise and adding it to yours to find more customers to delight, where actually the value exchange runs three ways: to the customer, to the channel, and to you, then crack on. But do it in a very mindful and considered way. Don't rush it. Start small and scale. If you find a partner, they will help you find other partners. It's a little like a viral approach, because it's a very small organization, a very small world that you operate in at the end of the day. Finding people who are interested in your product to say yes. If you can find some partners to help you say yes more often, they will also attract other partners. So it can work well, but don't approach it as this is a cheaper channel to sell.
Brilliant advice, I think, Steve. Mark, what's your final words of wisdom for anyone at that juncture?
So much the same, really. I say, number one, understand very clearly across the leadership team why you're doing it. There has to be a very clear reason as to why you're doing it, and that drives outcomes, it drives goals. I would then say, without planning to extreme detail, but understand how you're going to do it. In terms of, as we've touched on, is it new verticals, is it new geographies, what types of partners, how you're going to approach them? And then I'd say the third thing is, what are you prepared to invest? Because this doesn't come for free. And when it's a what, this is not just a question to the CFO. This is an organizational investment, and it's going to require a shift in thinking, especially if you've never done indirect sales. It's going to require a shift in thinking across the board in getting the sales team to engage differently, all the way through, as we've discussed, to support and even product as well. So being clear about what you're prepared to invest, and if it's enough to deliver on what you're expecting out of it from the why.
Brilliant. Guys, I would just like to extend my thanks and gratitude to the time that you've given me today to contribute to this podcast. And I hope that anybody watching or listening gets a distinct and tangible amount of value from what Steve and Mark have shared. So Steve Mozley, Chief Marketing Officer at LiveView, and Mark Rawlings-Smith, now at Wowzer as Strategic Alliance Director. Thank you so much for this episode of the OTTRED Spotlight Podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking to you guys, as always.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Mark. Good chat.